Alors, mesdames, messieurs, distingués...
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, good afternoon. Welcome to this panel, this workshop, that will in fact take place only in English. So I would ask you to put on your headphones if you're not familiar with the language of Shakespeare.
I welcome you to this panel that, as you know, will have to do with the future of trials, whether it is virtual or not. So welcome to all of you here in the room, and welcome as well to all of those following us currently through video conferencing. We've been discussing since this morning the use of technology for hearings and trials in general. The panel that was here in this very room this morning dealt with online dispute resolution and how it's now being used more and more by the courts. And the latest panel also discussed how courts are now using technology to have better access to individuals. And so to discuss this topic further, and in order to really look at where the future of using technology for hearings and virtualizing said hearings, how that is going to happen. We have four distinguished lecturers, and they all allowed me to be very brief in their presentation, to not take too much of their time. And of course, I refer you to their biographies that is in the pouch that was given to you this morning. So to my left is Linda MULCAHY. Linda is a professor of Socio-Legal Studies and the director of the Center for Socio-Legal Studies at the University of Oxford. Next to her is Anna TSALAPATANIS, who is a lecturer in sociology and social policy at University College of London. At the very right of the table is Professor David TAIT, who is a professor at the University of Western Sydney and the convener of the Court of the Future Network. And last but certainly not least, Professor Volker SETTGAST, who is a senior researcher at Fraunhofer, Austria Research. And so, without any further ado, I will cede the floor to Anna and Linda for their presentation.
Thank you so much, Nicolas. And thank you for the invitation to be here today.
Excuse me? There you go.
Okay, thank you very much. So Anna and I would like to discuss a topic which has been alluded to today but hasn't really been considered in much depth, and that's digital disadvantage. And this really speaks for us to the theme of democracy and equal access to justice, which we have been rehearsing in various sessions so far. So we'd like to do three things. First of all, we'd like to introduce you to the project on which we will be drawing some conclusions. Secondly, we'd like to talk a little bit about what we mean by digital disadvantage. And then thirdly, we would like to talk about what we learnt about the digitally disadvantaged from the work that we did with them. And there are two names on the presentation today, but actually we had a third person on our project, Emma Rowden, from Oxford Brookes University, who we'd like to acknowledge her contribution as well. So to start off then with introducing the Supporting Online Justice project, this is a project that we conducted with the Courts and Tribunal Service in the UK as our partner. And also, although initially they were told they weren't allowed to be involved with us, the judges got involved as well, because they heard what we were doing and wanted to get involved and told the bureaucrats that they would get involved in the project. And then we also researched the viewpoint of a number of citizens. So the goals of the project were fivefold. The main goal was to produce 5 films for use by lay users attending an online hearing during the COVID pandemic. So as we all know, hearings got forced online, and there was a lot of concern that the digitally disadvantaged or people from low-income backgrounds would have particular problems in accessing these systems. So we put a proposal to the government that we had enough research background in the field to help them help people understand what an online hearing was and how they could participate effectively in it. So we had 5 additional goals. First of all, enhancing knowledge on how to prepare for an online hearing, including signposting to advice agencies and web-based resources. Secondly, to improve people's understanding of online court processes. That very quickly turned into helping people understanding court processes before they even went online. Thirdly, supporting court users in navigating the alternative geographies of online, which some of you will know I write a lot about legal architecture. I think the geography of online space continues to be really important. And also that sense of legal time, recreating that sense, the temporality of law in a virtual space. Fourthly, engendering a sense of journeys to and from that civic space, and we'll expand on that, and then promoting dignity and gravitas in virtual court proceedings, so allowing people, encouraging and supporting them to present their best self in the online hearing.
So just to contextualise the kind of research behind this process, we used a very iterative design, and throughout this process we were monitoring, we were defining, researching, testing the designs that we put together. But the specific research elements included kind of an initial stage of looking at current examples and current best practice to make sure that we weren't duplicating work that had already been done. We were very much driven by extensive consultation. We needed many insights into what was happening into the different jurisdictions, and we involved judges, the court service and the advice sector in that initial stages. We then went out to a national survey which went to court staff, technical staff, lawyers and translators, and we received over 500 responses to that survey, which anyone who circulated a survey knows that's not a small number. On the basis of all that information, we put together a pilot film, and we recognised that this film needed testing. So at that point, the kind of key research design testing process took place. So we took the film to focus groups. We had 24 focus groups with 148 individuals, and essentially these fell into three groups. We had kind of technical staff, professional staff, so interpreters, ushers and clerks from the court service, so people who are involved in a professional capacity. We then had kind of regular lay users, and then we focused specifically on disadvantaged users. So a third of that sample were disadvantaged. And we did these focus groups in food banks, which we'll talk about more. There was then a second national survey. On the basis of this information, we then redesigned the films. They then went through to further consultation, and on the basis of all of that, we then produced the final films, which have now been circulated.
So in terms of the outputs of the project, we produced 5 15-minute films. For anyone who is interested, we're happy to talk about why they were 15 minutes. They were available with subtitles in 6 languages, commonly spoken in England and Wales. We had British Sign Language versions of the films, which are actually the first HMCTS or Court Service sponsored films that have sign language. And these were all loaded onto the Courts and Tribunal YouTube channel, and so far we've had about 20,000 hits on there. Also, because the judges were so keen to be involved in the project, they were really our best supporters at the end, and they now refer to these films in all the correspondence they send out to litigants. And finally, we handed over a whole design kit to the Courts and Tribunal services with all the images that we had produced, with the scripts that we had produced, with annotations as to why we had changed the words that might be suggested to us by professionals and judges, and all the decisions that we'd made by reference to the focus group feedback. So the story is a great one for us. We won a prize for this project. Unfortunately, the Vice Chancellor of our university gave the ultimate prize to a medical team who had invented a COVID vaccination, which we thought was really unfair, that we really should have got it. But, you know, there was lots of positive stuff that came out of this research, and we've had good coverage. But there were also some problems. And there were some issues that arose about the way in which the court service is looking at the digitally disadvantaged and taking into account their needs. And it's that we wanted to move on to next.
So yes, now we want to give you some of the insights that we gleaned around the digitally disadvantaged. But first, to kind of give you a little bit of context, what the social science research tells us at the moment is that digital disadvantage often intersects with other forms of disadvantage. It's compounded. Often these are people with low levels of education, from lower socioeconomic brackets. They may be older people. They may be living in poverty. So it often doesn't come alone. And the literature on digital disadvantage highlights kind of 3 elements to this problem. And that includes a lack of equipment, as well as not having an adequate connection, so no or poor bandwidth. We also know that people who may be homeless, who may be facing eviction, don't necessarily have a regular internet connection or even money for a reliable data service. They also may lack skills and confidence. Concept of digital disadvantage in relation to the legal sector and what kind of implications it has for them. We know that often these people may live in what we call advice or support deserts, areas where it's difficult to actually see someone face to face in order to get assistance. They are less likely to spend the time to deep dive for legitimate information if they do go searching for information. And we also know they may be subject to situational disadvantage, which is just the whole role of their entire context and how that comes to play in relation to the kind of court sector. So maybe the anxiety that they're feeling, the importance of the issue that they're trying to resolve and how that affects their participation.
So in other words, dealing with a judge in an online or an offline court is very different from dealing with Amazon because they've delivered your book to the wrong address. So we really wanted to take into account that situational disadvantage. So one of the things we did a deep dive in is how are government departments interacting with the digitally disadvantaged. And rather ironically, we've seen a few electronic surveys trying to capture the views of the digitally disadvantaged in the UK, which is clearly a problem. I'm sure I don't have to explain why to an intelligent audience. And when those, they haven't had much of a response from people that we would classify as digitally disadvantaged, we've often seen those being replaced by paper surveys, which, given the sort of compound disadvantage Anna is talking about, is equally as problematic in this group that we were really trying to get at. We also see use of market research panels who have regular panels of people who will test out products. And we did look into using those market research panels, but of course one of the things about the digitally disadvantaged, if their disadvantage is compounded with poverty and chaotic lives, is that they're not actually the sort of reliable people that you will get on those panels. So yet again, those panels miss people out. We were also became very worried about the focus group canon as sociologists and lawyers, very aware that there is a particular way in which you should conduct focus groups that you will find in methodology books in the social sciences. And our experience, and this is a photo from one of our focus groups, was that just didn't work when you were talking to people in poverty with chaotic lives. They weren't used to turn-taking. We had people who had substance abuse and who were drinking during the focus group. And this is not to criticise those people. They led really chaotic lives, but it made us think that we need to revisit that social science canon. Something else that we were very clear about is that the most disadvantaged of the people that we were interacting with are not non-experts. We call them the laity. They are often lay experts in relation to the legal system. A number of them had already had contact with the criminal justice system. So they actually, in many ways, had quite an interesting expertise to bring to that. And what we found so important about this research was that when judges were talking to us about the ways they wanted to explain how proceedings worked or the language that they thought people needed to know about, we were often able to use these views from focus groups to really counteract too much formality in the film or too much complexity and work around the ideas that were coming out of the focus groups.
So in trying to devise these films and to cater for the needs of the digitally disadvantaged, we ended up with a range of competing production ideals. So we were torn between the need to be specific enough to be useful, as well as accounting for the variations between platforms, hearing types, litigants and conventions. And then again, between having them short enough for time and attention-poor viewers, as well as also providing a significant amount of meaningful information.
We needed to have simple enough language to be accessible, whilst also not being patronising. And this was something that was really important in the focus groups. The disadvantaged people we spoke to really picked up on anything that they thought was patronising them. And that was probably the major thing that we had to change about the films. We also wanted to alleviate the anxiety of people about going in front of a state tribunal or court, but at the same time we wanted them to take it seriously. So again, that was another quite difficult balance that we had to address.
So in this final section, we want to look at what we learnt from this research and design process, and specifically some of these elements around digital disadvantage. And the first of these is empathy. And the empathy just involved us putting ourselves in their shoes. So we're very aware of the types of support that they may be able to reach out to, and we were very sensitive with our guidance, recognising that they may not necessarily have access to a quiet space or somewhere where they can have a comfortable hearing. So it was managing the language in a way to deal with that.
The second point is imagining a preparatory journey, and I think the need for this is captured in the view of one of our participants who said, 1 minute I was cooking pancakes for my kids' breakfast and getting them off to school. The next minute I was in a hearing fighting to get the redundancy pay that was due to me. So it's that sort of rapid and quite violent shift from being in your kitchen to suddenly being in a courtroom. So we were trying in the films to prepare people and make them think that the preparation was part of the journey. Testing out equipment, getting their notice of hearing, trying out whether they knew how to use the software, preparing their paperwork, getting their room ready, the backdrop, putting important contact names in their phone, and preparing the area around them before they went into the hearing.
And the next one is the fact that language was contested. We all know that legal language is very complicated, so there was this tension between the desire to keep language as easy and as simple as possible for the users, but also then pressure from the judges to use legal terminology and legal terms. And often we have to get into the middle to play advocate for what would be better for these users.
The next point is diversity. We really felt strongly that in these films we wanted people to watch them and feel there are people, they are talking to people like me. And we were really pleased in terms of ethnic diversity, people with physical disabilities, colour, religion. We thought we did that brilliantly, but we still got some things wrong. So just to give you an indication of one of the comments we got back, a number of people said to us there are no people who are bald with shaven heads and tattoos in this. So this is a middle-class vision of diversity which we needed to improve.
So the next one was accessibility, and this was part of the design process from the very beginning. And there's a lot of focus on accessibility in these films. But I just want to quickly show you 3 examples. Of course, the British Sign Language that Linda mentioned previously. We've also got the first image on this screen. The videos were tested for different forms of colour blindness to see whether or not they still retain their meaning. And finally, that's an example of some of the subtitles. So once again, they were subtitled in 6 languages.
The penultimate thing that we wanted to talk about was participation. I was very keen to make sure that people knew their due process rights. I spend a lot of time in physical courtrooms watching fairly low-level trials on the whole, and the first thing that I would say is that hardly anyone participates in their own hearing unless they are asked a direct question. So we really built into this that we wanted people to feel free to challenge information if they felt it was incorrect, or to speak up if they didn't understand something. So we frequently throughout the films had these indications that they should put up their hand if they didn't understand that something was happening, or that they should be aware of turn taking but feel comfortable about interjecting in the proceedings.
And the final one is jurisdictional customisation. So we were working with a range of jurisdictions, and these hearings all look very different. So it's important when you're preparing someone for a hearing that they have the right expectations. So there was very much a need to adapt each film to each jurisdiction because there was so much variation between them.
And finally, this is where you can find out more, and please do visit the website and have a look at the films and give us some feedback, because we're constantly trying to improve this. Thank you.
Well, thank you both for that extremely interesting presentation, and that gives us a lot of food for thought on how these virtual hearings can and should be held. But that's the present that you've been discussing, and now let's look into the possible future of online hearings. And so before I cede the floor to Volker, I believe we have a short video to show. So I would ask the people in the booth to please show us this video. We seem to be having a little trouble with the sound. Please bear with us just a few seconds. So the video you've just seen, now I hear myself with an echo, which is always great. The video you just seen is taken from a project that our two next lecturers have been working on for quite some time now. So I will cede the floor to Volker, who will explain exactly what all of this is about and how they have come to it. So please, Volker.
Yeah, hello. Thank you for introducing me. I would like to talk a little bit about the technical background of what you just saw. Maybe you're a bit confused, and obviously also the video did not play very precisely on point, but that doesn't matter. So it's the basic idea is to improve video conferences for example, a court hearing. And first of all, I would like to say that I'm from Austria, maybe you're interested, and I'm from Fraunhofer, Austria. Fraunhofer is an organization for applied science, quite big in Germany and also available in Austria, and I'm from Graz in Austria, a very nice city. And we have also have a large group about visual computing, which is the group where I work in, and there's also another group about artificial intelligence, which is located in Klagenfurt. All right, so video conferences have this strange effect that you look into a camera and you try to be part of a conversation. And in normal conversations, when I want to talk to a person, I look into his face or her face, and I talk to the person, and the person immediately knows, okay, now I'm the one who's the next to talk or who's spoken of. And this is very hard to simulate. There are some ideas how to integrate a video conference into it. For example, Microsoft calls it together mode. You see it here as an example where it looks like you are in the same room, but still you look into the camera, so there's no real connection. Other possibilities would be to use virtual reality, which is very interesting, but also very strange, and it looks like a comic or, I don't know, made for children. So the question is this the right way for a court hearing? So we came up with another idea. The idea is to have a simulation of a courtroom, also with simulated characters. And when you look into the room, so it's a first-person camera, and when people look to you, you see this because they look into the camera. And when they look to each other, you see that they are talking to each other. So this is what I wanted to simulate with those two slides here. Yeah. And we tried out different characters, so it was easy to use comic-like characters, but obviously it's much more interesting to have realistic characters. Here also the question occurs, do we really need realistic characters that look like me or you or the ones that are participating, or is it okay to use general characters? For example, the judge could be very generalized and be a person that is not really a person, it's more like a concept. And also you could avoid prejudices, or you can avoid racism by just using characters that look, I don't know, maybe with a yellow color like with The Simpsons, or I don't know, something like that. So that's a question that we would like to answer. The other point is that we can use different kind of courtrooms. So we can simulate where the hearing takes place. We tried out a small room. We tried out a larger courtroom here, you can see on the right. And what we also wanted to do is simulate what it looks like when I talk, what's happening with my face, also with my body, which could also be the next part. So you can see in this video, I'm talking, and it's unfortunately very small, but you can slightly see that the virtual characters are moving the same way I move, more or less, of course. So there are limitations, but we try to simulate this as well. And this will also be used for distinguishing where I look. So when I look at one person, I move my head to that direction, and this is then simulated with this technique. Yeah, you can see it here a little bit. And so we have some future plans. What we also want to integrate is hand gestures, for example, which would be very simple in the first case, that when you raise your hand, also your virtual character raises his or her hand. Could be interesting to use. More interesting would be to have the whole body be tracked, so you know how the persons really move, and simulate that in a detailed version. Also, we would like to manipulate or modify the environment where it takes place. It could be interesting to scan a real courtroom, and also the characters. We want to experiment how they could look. For example, scan a face and try to really look at like it's, for example, my face. But there's always the problem that when you try to be too realistic, there's this strange gap. It's called uncanny valley, and it has this effect that everything looks artificial and strange and doesn't quite fit. This is because we as a human, we are trained to distinguish faces very good, so the face recognition in our brain works very well, and when you don't, when you not simulate it very detailed, then you have a problem. Yeah, so that's from my side, the technical part, and now I would like to give over to David.
Okay. So. So.
I think it will take some time for this.
Okay. Okay. Bonjour à tous.
Good afternoon. I'll be speaking English. But before starting, I would like to express my thanks to the organizers of this symposium. In particular, the RG in Paris. Valerie, thank you. The Cyberjustice Laboratory in Montreal. Thank you, Nicolas. Thank you, Hannes. The team at the Council of Europe, in particular the invisible team, the interpreters. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you to each and every one of you.
What I'm going to be talking about is a sort of change from what other people have been talking about, dematerialization. We're talking about rematerialization, trying to create new environments, new images, and new experiences. And so this throws completely into question the forms of symbolism that we want. And I'm going to start by talking a bit about what we learnt from the pandemic and then move on to where we're hoping to go. Okay, so before the pandemic, people appeared as individuals, framed in boxes in a Zoom gallery. And as Volker said, they were looking forward. However, the pandemic allowed us to recognise that, in fact, maybe the courtroom itself was redundant, at least on some occasions. It was possible to have hearings without a courtroom. And for many jurisdictions, that actually improved access for some people, maybe not the most disadvantaged, as Linda pointed out, but for many people it improved access, and it was often cheaper and more efficient for the courts. But, you know, I'm a sociologist. I'm much more concerned about kind of philosophical issues like fairness and legitimacy. So our questions are, how can we not just maintain existing levels of fairness, but improve them? And can the technology assist us with that? Okay, now the first thing we want to say is representations. The word bundle, I think you used. Well, there's a whole bundle of representations. Just about everything in a courtroom represents something. Judges are not there on their own behalf. They're there to represent the Republic or the state or the Crown, but they're there as representatives. Similarly, lawyers aren't there just to show off their rhetorical skills. They're there... Is there a problem? No?
Not for you, but the camera's on me right now and not on David.
Oh, well, you're more handsome than me, yeah.
Should be seen.
Oh, okay.
But it is, you are even more, it's being shared.
Okay.
Yeah. And lawyers represent their clients. They're not there to perform on their own behalf. And similarly, prosecutors are there to represent the people or the state or whatever. So they're all representatives. But then when you look at the room itself, the court's room, it's full of representations. And that's one of the challenges. And Linda's talked about the geography of the courtroom, and she's written a lot of valuable work on that. Well, you know, one of the most key features is whether it's a contest, an adversarial contest. And the French courts do that very well by opposing the two parties. English and Australians do it terribly by putting them together, indicating a conspiracy. The judge, you know, coming in a separate entrance and being isolated from the rest of the parties, that indicates independence. It's a representation. But one of the most controversial ones we've been involved in, and Linda's been involved on the English end of this, is about where to put the accused. There's a few jurisdictions in Europe, but only a few that actually believe in human rights in terms of where they put the accused. Unfettered, beside their lawyer. In California, if you're a defendant, you're likely to be chained in 5 places and shackled to the floor. In England and Wales or France, you're likely to be put in a glass cage. And we've done randomised controlled trials that shows that you're almost twice as likely to be found guilty if you're put into any form of confinement, whether it's an open dock or a glass cage. But most jurisdictions ignore that, and they say security is more important than fairness. Well, we say if we're redesigning something in virtual reality, why don't we put a premium on fairness? Okay, so the challenge for virtual courts is how to represent both the participants, the people, and the spaces. Okay, well, let's start by looking at representing the participants. As Volker said, the standard way it's done is in which people are in this box, a Zoom screen, and they're all looking forward. And this is an example of a Florida courtroom, and you can see the judge has got a flag beside him. There's a lawyer with the long hair. There's a person in a prison garb, so that's kind of pretty prejudicial. The victim or the complainant is in the middle, and I covered her over, but on the website her name and everything is extremely visible, so there's a lot of issues about privacy that we talked about in the last session. The person on the bottom right is a witness, a police witness, testifying from his car. And the most important person in the room, who's the one who gave me this photo, is the journalist who's in the top left-hand corner. Okay, so that's what we're used to during the pandemic. But there's a second approach, and this was something that Fraunhofer people suggested and developed, and this is Volker's work, in which we filmed people in green screen rooms and then post-production put them into a virtual environment. So you actually see the real actors, but we haven't done it live yet. But that's one way to do it, and it seems pretty realistic. And then the third method, which is what Volker showed, is when we're using avatars. And the question, there's a lot of issues about this, about who chooses and how, and that was the purpose of the little video we showed you about what are the rules for choosing avatars. Now, there's something to be said for having neutral avatars. If you think of judges, at least in some countries, like most of Australia, we have wigs and gowns, and that's part of the reason for that is that men are bald and they want to appear more important than they are, whereas female judges tend not to wear wigs because they've got nice hair. But the wigs and gowns tend to cover the personality and say, I am a neutral agent of the state. And so there's an argument for lawyers and judges to be neutral. One of the Montreal law students said to us when we were talking about it, she said, I want to be judged by the quality of my argument, not what I look like. And so there's a good argument about that. But then what to do about the witnesses and defendants and so on? What sort of choice should they have? Well, I won't answer that. I'll just refer you to that film where there's a dilemma. Okay, so that's how to represent people. Then now representing space. The key to this is we're talking about a shared space. That's what's different about this metaverse court than the grids in a Zoom gallery, because they're all isolated, fragmented. We're bringing people together in some way. Now, you could scan courts, and hopefully we'll be scanning some courts and using them, but really we think this is the chance to go beyond the traditional courtroom and think about what would we like to represent. If it's a dispute, maybe a family dispute, what would be the ideal situation? A kitchen table? Or what's the imagery that would work best? And there's two templates I'd like to suggest, both coming from European history, that I think would be highly interesting. One of them comes from Saint-Louis, the kind of historical French origin of justice under a tree, by Louis IX. So we could have a lovely tree and environment there, or some sort of garden. The second, as this is a Scandinavian one, is a ting, or a circle of stones around in which people sat and decided. So there are two models we could use, and in virtual reality there's absolutely no reason to have a room unless you really wanted one. You don't need to worry about the weather. So there you go. It's all a matter. It's a bundle of representations. We have a lot of choices ahead of us. And I think what we'd really like to do is encourage anybody who wants to work with us to kind of go through this process of testing, trying, making mistakes, and then learning from it. And if you are interested in working with us, one of the things we're doing with our French colleagues is running a court, what we call an executive research tour, at the end of next year, October, in the Netherlands, and then some in France. And the reason where it's in the Netherlands is because I think it's got one of the most humane, democratic court layouts and systems. They have one of the lowest imprisonment rates in the Western world, and they have some of the lowest crime rates. And we think there's something about a humane justice system that has a lot to be said for it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. As you can see, our lecturers had agreed to stay brief in their presentation so that we could have ample time for questions, and thank you all for respecting your time. And so I will turn it to all of you. Are there any questions? Obviously, if you prefer asking your questions in French, feel free to do so, and I will act as interpreter to give our friends in the back a little leeway, a little time off. So any questions for panelists? And while you think of your... Well, yes, sir.
This was very interesting. And I have a question about the avatars. Because by using the avatars and the flexibility of using different avatars, you may also create additional problems. And some of such issues were already presented in your video. So do you think any risk of a specific risk of that, and how to limit such risk? For example, that you made it obligatory to use the almost real faces, identical to the reality. So this will be my first question. And the second one is, you are using this Unreal Engine. So is there any specific issues concerning the use of this engine? We have also a new version of this engine, I think 5.0, so which could make a very realistic avatars, in my opinion. So what version of the engine you are using, and what are your prospects for future? If you will present in Netherlands, in France, this version of the system or an improved one? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question, or the questions too. So first, of course, there's always the danger to somehow use this avatar for your purpose. Of course, you could use it to look like an innocent small child or something like that. I mean, this is a drastic example, but of course you could change your view yourself, how you look, to improve your state in the court hearing, to improve how other people think about you.
Can we use artificial intelligence to move the avatar in place of the person, so the AI will behave like a real person? Is there such risk?
Yeah, so moving like the real person is one possibility, and we already use artificial intelligence for that. So you saw my face and the interpretation of how my face moves. This is already done with a model that is translated to the movement of the avatar, of course. And so of course you have to have rules or restrictions on what you are allowed to do and what not, of course. And also an interesting question I asked some people in the audience already: is it really important to see all the movement, all what my body does, to see if somebody is telling the truth or being honest? So body language, is this an important factor, or can we maybe get rid of that, or how important is it actually? So that's the question, and maybe also a question of research, I would say. David, do you want to add to that?
Do you want to mention about the version of Unreal?
Yeah, okay. So the second question was about this Unreal Engine, very technical, but of course I would like to answer because that's my field. So we use the Unreal Engine 5.2 already, and the avatars are made with MetaHuman, which is a technology made also by the same company, this Epic Games company. It's a game engine, so they use it for computer games, yeah, sure. But it's very powerful, and so they expanded a lot over the last years, and the technology is also used for other applications, for example, also now for those video conferences. It's very demanding. So what you saw is done with gaming PCs, and my office PC is a quite good PC with a good graphics hardware, and of course this is a problem. On the other hand, it's a challenge, let's say it like this. So on the other hand, we try to use normal webcams, so to track the face, to track maybe also the hands or the upper body. We would like to use a normal setup as you would use in a video conference system. But you will still need a capable PC to visualize it. Oh, yeah.
Maybe you can use GeForce Now. Sorry.
I'm sorry, there are other questions as well. We'll get back to you afterwards. Valérie Sagan?
To both team of panelists, I have two questions to each. One question to each. You said, Linda and Anna, that you had identified the lessons learned from these films and this experience. But since the films are used, do you have some feedback? Have you organized other focus group? And how do you assess the effect of those films? And maybe to Volker and David, the same question. How much have you measured the impact of the different options of avatars? Have you evaluated this also on real people or only on people of your teams? Thank you.
So we'll start with question one, ladies.
The response is very quick and easy to your question, and thank you for it. We're just, at the moment, we're being very crude and just going on our YouTube hits, which are going up, and we're quite interested in when they go up at particular times. We know, for instance, that some of the judges were slow to put the reference to the film in there, letters with litigants, and then when they did do that, you get a hit for a certain, you get an increase in hits. Actually, the Ministry of Justice is doing an evaluation of the impact, but they've been really slow. They're quite busy at the moment with a court modernisation programme, as you probably know, £2.4 billion, that we're sort of waiting to be evaluated by them. Yeah.
One thing that's really interesting, of course, there's lots of metrics you get out of YouTube. And the fact that they're hosted on His Majesty's Courts and Tribunal YouTube page means we don't have access to them. And very early on, we tried to negotiate access, but it's something that they have requested to keep internally. And we're very keen. The only thing we can see is what Linda mentioned in terms of the kind of crude numbers. But of course you get other forms of informal feedback, and as Linda said, we were told when they went up that if they didn't perform they'd be taken down immediately. So there's also the question of, they are going to be monitored, and if they're not meeting the court's performance standards they will be removed, which doesn't seem to be an issue at the moment.
Could I just add quickly to that? I think it's really important to say as a researcher, because you always want to tell people what problems you've had with research projects so that others know who are following you how to improve on things. There were certain bits of the court service that didn't like what we were doing, and those were the people that were making videos about court hearings. And they felt that we were stepping on their toes. We were interfering with where they were experts. So we had quite a few interesting meetings where they interrogated us about our methodology. I mean, Anna and I are both very experienced methodologists. We are happy to talk about methodology, but we had some rather bizarre situations. So I think that's important to acknowledge, actually, that for researchers working with government departments, these are often vast organisations and not everyone in there loves you, which is why we were so happy that the judges were really supportive. Those were our happy days.
Well, thank you both, and gentlemen, for the second question.
Okay, in terms of different versions of avatars, we would certainly be very keen to do that. But at the moment we're using standard ones that all look like they come from a rave party or beatniks or something. So we'd like to have ones that vaguely look like lawyers. They don't need to be too close. But Volker is the next ones. They're going to put robes on them, and then we'll sort of be able to test that. But in the virtual courts, the avatars are only about a third or to half of the size they would be on a Zoom screen. Most of the impression is given by the room itself. So we randomly assign people to seeing different sorts of room to see how they'll respond. And we think that will have a larger impact than actually the appearance of the avatars.
Thank you. We have about a minute left, so I saw there was a question at the back, so if you can ask it very quickly.
I'll do my best to be very quick. I'll first thank all four of you for brilliant presentations, brilliant work. My question is actually about, I think I will bring the two projects together in my question. What methodology did you develop to test your different avatars? Because in terms of a possible paradigm change in generation of legal knowledge and in fact assessment, this is potentially enormous, I think. I could give examples, but in 1 minute it's maybe too short to give examples. Sorry.
Thank you very much. I'll start with you, gentlemen.
Well, if I understand your question, you're asking about how you would evaluate the impact of the avatars. Well, the only real way to do it is randomised controlled trials in which you vary the avatars, you vary the environment, and you might vary the scenario. But probably there'll be a threshold effect. For the first 10 minutes, people they'll be a bit confused, and only then will they start to really notice the difference. But certainly we've run about 6 randomised controlled trials about court technology so far, and this would be just another one in the sequence.
Yeah, just to make a point in relation to that, I love hearing about David's work because it's always really challenging and it's really coming on and it's fascinating. But I think you're working at a really sophisticated end of technology. We were actually working at a very simple end because we were sort of working for our images to just look simple. And one of the reasons for that was actually that the advice that we got from specialists in neurodiversity was that we needed to keep it simple. We didn't want too much moving at any one stage. We were very careful about our colour balance, our colour palettes in each of the films. And, so there's a lot of science, I think, sometimes, behind what we've been trying to do, which is different, but is producing simplicity so that people don't feel a cognitive overload as they work their way through the film. It was meant to calm them and keep it simple. So, sometimes you back off from technology, I think, in order to do that.
Well, thank you all for those presentations. Thank you for your questions. And so I will simply ask you all to join me in thanking one more time our four panelists. David beat me to it before, but I would also ask you all to, or thank in your name our interpreters as well as the technical team for their help. It is now time for our last health break of the day, so a 20-minute break, and in 20 minutes I invite you all to join us in the other room for the last presentation, which will be animated by Valérie Sagan. So see you all in 20 minutes.